free lawyer because I supervise second and third year law students at the University of Iowa. And we've been working on disability issues, access, voting, mental health. We are a consultant law firm. We work a lot on policy and housing. And you asked me to speak today on a couple of things. One is the change in laws. And the reason I ask so many questions of Travis and John is because they answer most of them. And it's sort of difficult to talk with the change in laws without confusing people about what the past law was. So all you know is you have to remember the dates that they told you you have to submit an absentee ballot, and when it has, you have to request it, and when it has to be received. You have to know that if you are used to voting leisurely and you wanted that last cup of coffee, the polls close at 8 o'clock this year, not 9 Central Standard Time. So depending on where you're traveling, if you haven't reset your watch, that's one thing. Those are the major changes, only to know that the state has cut back by shortening the time period for requesting and filing absentee ballots, and shorten the hours and taking other actions. And I've got lots of materials that you can find out the specifics, and I'll talk about them, but our officials just gave you a pretty good wrap-up of what the changes have been. Well, one of the things I always hear is how many reasons I have for not voting. And I think that makes a difference, because if you remember, there's a congressional race that was decided by 6 votes a couple of years ago. When I lived in a small town in Maryland, there was a mayoral race. And we had a local person who decided she was going to run against him after all these years because he'd been there so long and he was not as enlightened as many people had hoped. It was a town of 2,500. We lost that election, I'm saying, because it's like 50 to 49. And that out of 2,500 people, those are the only people. And the mayor who won had taken everybody who had been a client of his and he bussed them for free to make sure they got there. So those were the reasons, some of the reasons to vote that you heard from our first presenters. And a couple of things to remember with the disability issue as well. We're not just talking about older people with disabilities. You don't have to have Social Security disability. It's not an ADA disability. Its limitations are our ability to see, hear, walk, right? Understand information, process information, speak. And the motto for years in the Advocacy Network has been, as you said, nothing about us without us. And that's why the vote is important. Because if you don't voice it, then someone else is going to make decisions. That was in the first slide for you. And we're pretty independent, and that's what we hope people will remember. So here are some other important things I wanted to discuss. One of the questions we get, especially from parents whose children are approaching 18 or over 18, and the children will have intellectual or developmental disabilities that might be lifelong and that may restrict their ability to thrive in the community, to understand certain life functions, understand how to make change, to do things. And so they're thinking about having a guardianship. They would become, and it would be for older people as well. I think my granddaughters are always going, oh God, if Pa gets any worse, we're gonna have to get a guardianship. And one of the questions is, guardianship means stripping away some of my civil rights in the name of protecting the person from being exploited, and also because the person needs some guidance or actually to override what they want. And they want to know under what circumstances can a court deprive me of my right to vote. And Iowa law has a couple of provisions with it. And I think it was on the first slide, when a judge or tribunal declares that you are incompetent to vote. And under Iowa law, it says a judge shall make a determination about my right to vote if They were thinking, do I need a guardian? Whenever a person with an intellectual disability is going to be the subject of the guardianship. And to be incompetent, it means that when I lack the sufficient mental capacity, and this is the language right out of the law, to comprehend and exercise the right to vote. So it's sort of twofold. Do I understand and do about exercising it? And we've already learned that there are lots of ways you can exercise your vote here, with assistance, without assistance, drive through. The only thing we don't have is fly through yet, but I'm pretty sure that's coming. So what does that mean? And thankfully there haven't been court cases about this that discuss if and when a judge should say, I lack the right to vote. And that would be in the guardianship order, and that would be sent to the county officials. And if I showed up, or my guardian showed up with me, and I tried to cast a vote, I would be on the no vote list, and I could not cast it. In my experience, we've only had one person that I'm aware of in Johnson County that a judge has made a determination that they don't have the ability to cast a vote. And it only applies to intellectual disabilities. And of course, there is a statutory definition of it. And it applies to children and adults who, as because of inadequately developed intelligence, have a significant impairment in the ability to learn. That's sort of the one. Or to adapt to the demands of society. Or to adapt to them. And it just means you can't negotiate your way through the world without risk of harm to yourself. So that means that's when my civil rights could be taken away. And it involves more than voting as well. And if a diagnosis is required, then it would be the diagnosis of mental retardation. So what does that mean if you're thinking about having a guardianship for your child or anyone else? It means that you have to be careful when you're filling out the court papers. The petition is the piece of paper that you file asking the court to be appointed guardian. If it's the person for medical, where you're going to live, conservatorship is money. And it has nothing to do with where you're going to live, marriage, service, and other things. Which means that you can write the facts about what my abilities are without giving a diagnosis, because there is no diagnosis required. If you have a special education teacher who would be writing an affidavit, meaning a sworn statement, so you don't have to hire a psychiatrist or a consultant in order to prove that I can't protect myself or I don't have the ability. Then just make sure you draft the papers and word them carefully. If you have any questions, then you have Disability Rights Iowa, you have our clinic, you have Transition Center, and there are parent groups locally. Parents who are guardians and conservators for their children. So, what does it take to need to vote? Well, we've just told the judges, you don't need a good reason to vote, a bad reason to vote. You don't need any reason to vote or not vote, but to vote is important for me. All right. And or for voting for or against a particular candidate. And this has happened in our family, if you watch TV and you know who's running, and you can come in and fill out a ballot, that's enough. Because there are a lot of people that don't make decisions. And you've heard from Travis and John, I'm going to go vote, but I'm not going to cast my vote. And with judges, everyone asks me, who should I vote for with the judges? And what you're doing is voting for to retain them. Should they be retained? And I know people that just have a protest vote. I don't want any judge sitting, and they just go, no. They have no idea who they are. And I'll tell you where you can find that out as well. But so with regard to this is one of the constitutional rights that are really critical. And just because you have a diagnosis of intellectual disability, developmental disability, mental retardation, if you've had a stroke, because many people have guardianships because they have a stroke, it doesn't mean that they should have their right to vote taken away. Okay, so why do people think it's hard to vote? And one of them, because of the barriers that you've heard of. One is physical access. I can't get in and out, and you've heard the great pains that people have taken, and sometimes under the threat of federal intervention, or because the Department of Justice has come in upon a complaint, or because people have sued. Because there are many other federal laws that regulate access. There's actually an election assistance commission that is charged with that in the federal government. In addition to the Americans with Disabilities Act and other laws, there are other protections that say, wait a second, you've got to make sure this is the most inclusive place. And also that they have to inspect it now. We've got a survey checklist, and we do a lot of checking as well. Not just for voting places, they're really good for other things too. Whether it's systems, or whether it's a school, or whether it's the law school or your doctor's office as well. So there are architectural and physical barriers, and most of those don't exist anymore. And we talk about what voting with assistance, and when you need it, and not all of us need it, and sometimes we will. And you've heard that there are different ways. You can drive by, but you have to stop. And I've driven through on the elections, and they just give me a pencil or a pen and a clipboard and the ballot. They take my ID and they say, you'll get it back and we'll switch the vote. And I do that. So I never have to get out of my car. And if I hurt my leg, which I did a couple years ago, my wife or children will drive me. You also can vote curbside. And you've heard how that goes as well. And I don't know whether you have a signaler, because a lot of districts just have a signal thing where you can, like at the gas stations, you hit it and it rings the bell and says, come on, fill my gas tank. Well, here it's send 2 poll workers, one from each party. And then you have the other assistants. And I think what will be really important for people is next time we should have an accessible voting machine. Because then you'll see the different ways that these machines overcome our limited vision, our limited hearing, our limited dexterity in our hands, as well, so we can understand the ballot and we can process the information despite many of our limitations. And it's not because you have a formal disability, it's just because we all have different abilities. And my granddaughters think I should get one of those horns for the hearing. Okay, so if you need help marking ballots, I won't say much more about this because you have the 2 people, call them, because they're the experts. Okay, and ask any questions you want at any time. So what's at stake? As they said, there are new voting districts. We have a new congressional district, which changed the candidates and the boundaries about where we vote. You know, you can go on the county website, and I'll give you some other places where you can get this information online. What to say? Governor's race, right? We've got a lot of these things. So when our first presenters, who are both voters, they're vote young, and they're informed, but how do you find out? Think about what the governor's policies have been. Think about whether the person who's challenging the governor is going to make the changes that you think are important. The governor's responsible for a lot of, even though she's the executive, for legislation that's passed or defeated, right? She controls the executive branch, Department of Human Services. So if you're thinking about the state policies about Medicaid, or you're thinking about congregate living, you think about that budget and what she can do as well. You have the Attorney General, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer, and the state auditor, who really keeps cities, counties, and the state held up to snuff because of budgeting. And they find out a lot of times that someone's been dipping into the state's pocket. You read that in the paper a lot, but and you've got to find out about it. Secretary of State controls voting, controls corporations and information access. So think about what the government has done with regard to helping people vote, what they could have been doing differently. Same thing with agriculture. Although I was raised in New York City, so I was a member of the Grange, though, in Connecticut, because we helped a farm family when my husband died and they needed to bring the hay. So 5 of us sailors on a submarine went and loaded hay all day, but never again. Okay, and also the state treasurer. So what policy, what dollars they control, and then we've got other races, the Senate. And we have a long-standing senator, very long-standing senator, and we have a challenger. So you have to think, what has the incumbent done for you lately? And what is the incumbent likely to do in the future? And what do you think of their policies? What do you think of their constituent services? If I were going to look at one thing, because sometimes we had a Democrat and a Republican senator, and to my way of thinking, the Republican senator's constituent services were far superior. And I didn't care about voting at that point. I just said, if my clients need help, that's who I'll go to. And if I call the other person, even though I believe more in their political and policy issues. So think more than just about Republican or Democrat, but what they're doing. You also have U.S. House, and we've got 2 local, right? And one was the 6-vote difference last time, and she's in a new district. And we also have some out in another part of the state. We have Axne and Mathis versus Hinson, the battle of the TV people, right? And we've got state senators and state reps. And my way of thinking, I've been advocating on behalf of people and lobbying to add additional protections to people who own a mobile home but rent the space. And it made a difference about who I wanted, who would champion the bill, and who voted against it. And many times, depending on the composition, you have to see, do people vote because that's a party line? Right? And if it's a party line, then maybe you may think, whatever party you like, maybe you want to question the individual candidate about how they would have voted or what they will vote for on the issues that are important to you. Okay, so if you need a scorecard, because that's sort of the important thing, how do I find out about all of this? First thing I would do, don't look at attack ads on TV. They don't tell us anything. They're pretty cool sometimes. And they get people elected, whether you're slaughtering a hog and now it's throwing baloney, and they just throw the junk at everybody. So we have to be a little more discerning. Pay attention to what they're saying. And after you see the ads, if you look at them, and they're online, they just blitz you. And now they're 3 in a row on some of the TV stations because the ad money is really pouring in. Then really just take a deeper dive and find out, and it may be just having Curate systems or other places, and whether it's your neighborhood, have discussions. Just look up one office and just see what they say and see if they really say anything. Because a lot of times they were asked to answer, what do you think about disability rights? And they say, well, I supported this. Doesn't mean they voted for it. It doesn't mean they did anything. It doesn't mean they tried to persuade other colleagues. It just means they support it. Sort of dealing with our parents. And they tell us one thing, and then we got to question what's really going on and what they're saying. I would say that in my case anyway. Okay, so here are the best sources of information. And I've created a cheat sheet which really gives what I think are the best ways in as non-judgmental and objective a way. And they're not done in a boring way either, because that's the thing is, if it isn't something that you're curious about. So the first one, and this is not a paid political advertisement by the DD Council, who happens to be sponsoring this as part of their educational grants. But the DD Council has what's called InfoNet, and it is online, and it is in paper, and they have a special edition from September 8th, or September 30th. It's election time, and it gives a rundown on the state and federal election races. And they also have links to the state reps and Democrats, and what they do for every race, they send out a survey. Every candidate, regardless of party, and they group them by party, and they ask them questions. And they answer them. Most did. Some just refused to answer the question. And to me personally, that's a goodbye. I don't want to vote for them. If they don't take the time to think about me as a voter, but this is really an excellent piece of work. They also have candidate guide and voter assistance pages and fact sheets. And it talks about the dates, the new laws, getting ready to vote, voting made easy, and the website allows you to listen to it, to read it, and it's also accessible and usable by people with different technologies. So you should have no barriers. The other thing is, since this is funded, you can contact them and find out what other information you need in case Travis or John or you live in another county aren't available. And the voter assistance pages, some are in English, and they also have Spanish. So if you know people, and we will send the links to this to everybody in both Word and PDF. The other thing is the Iowa Secretary of State. We already heard the Johnson County. That's the go-to for us. Okay, but there's a voter ready guide. It's a new page they set up, and it tells you about when and where to vote and how. They also give step-by-step instructions, which are really valuable for people. And they have a special page about voters with disabilities. And they talk about all different limitations we might have. And then the quick check guide. What that is really a two-page ruler that has markings for the different features. Yeah, so you know the door has to be 32 inches wide when open 90 degrees. That's the minimum. A lot of them are now. Also, grips, clear path of travel, right? They have to have tables at different heights and now different voting machines. So this is a way for you to just walk through before it's time to vote. You can use it in any room because the dimensions are the same for other rooms as they are for voting, with just a few exceptions as well. So you can print that off, and there's another checklist available, lots of them. The AAPD is another source, the American Association of Persons with Disabilities. And that's written by and for people so we can understand it. I mentioned the Election Assistance Commission. I went on it. It's too lawyerly for me. I like to read plain, simple English, simple declarative sentences, no fuss. And then Disability Rights Iowa. That's our federally funded protection and advocacy. On any issue relating to disability, they provide no-cost representation, and they have a special section set up for people in elections. So if for some reason you're denied or have difficulty, you can call them. But they're not the first people I would call. I've been an observer at the polls. I've also been someone who's there for challenging, and thing that I know is when I see someone having difficulty, and the worker isn't picking up on it because there are lines, then I just walk over to who's ever the person who's running the voting that day. And there's usually someone walking around. And I just say, could you help this person? Okay, so sometimes you don't need assistance, but you have to see who's in charge, because you don't wait to sue people. What you want to do is cast your vote. And I'm not sure we talked about this, but if your vote's challenged as well, or our votes, then there's a way to do a provisional ballot where you vote and it's subject later to either to challenge or verification. And John and Travis will tell me whether I'm wrong on that, because they're the legal part on that. So those are the major ones. And now let's talk about the press.
Can I say
Yes.
one thing real quick about the access and disability access at the polls? You mentioned, you would walk around and say to a poll worker, we think this person might need help. That's one of the reasons we're doing the survey, is we want to find out if we're accommodating people with disabilities. So I'm glad that is one of the main reasons, where if I walked in and for 5 minutes nobody came over and greeted me or something, we want to know that. So that's one of the main reasons we're doing this survey.
Great advice. Speak up. If
Yes.
you're taking the time to vote and you want to make it better for people after you have voted, that's what you do. Because otherwise, if they don't know about it, what's going to happen? You're not going to vote again. Or you're going to try to vote differently, and the absentee ballot deadline may be shortened by another 20 days. I don't know, and it'll be too late. So it's good advice. You know the two people. You've got the connections. Just say, I was there. And the CIC, remember me. And even if they don't, they'll answer as well. Okay, so where do you learn other information about this? Let's start with the legitimate press. The Little Village, right? Great ads. And here, it's a one-sentence profile of state candidates. Those are hard to find when you read the Press Citizen or you read the Gazette. And it talks about the Attorney General, Auditor, and then they have a quiz later on about matching the person with their position. I'm not going through that, I'm just telling you, this is their short bio. To get the latest updates, right? It's hot off the presses this morning from the Sunday Register. They had it online, but this is Voting in America, a state-by-state compendium of what the state voting laws have been. And this is what I'll just read a little bit, okay? Iowa has traditionally allowed residents generous voting options with long hours, same-day registration, easy access to absentee ballots, and a lengthy early voting period. But some of them have been scaled back in recent times, and they go through what the changes are, and they tell you over the years what the major changes were. So it isn't just the 2021 law. It was in 2017 when all these voter ID requirements went on. And there are many people who live in our community who don't have ID. And even though we have an Iowa City community ID, I'm not sure that is acceptable under the voting rights. So that immediately suppresses the vote. And so I'll leave this here for you. It's now called the USA Today voting section because it now publishes the Des Moines Register. But you have the Little Village. What are the issues important to you? Because that's why we vote, right? So what is it that would make a difference on who you voted for? Is there just one issue?
The environment, reproductive rights.
So what is their record? This is what you have to do. Just ask what? The 5 W's. And I know that sounds simple, but we don't do it because it's easier to turn on the TV or internet and just get the information rather than trying to look and see. What's important to you and your family when you sit down around the table? Do you disagree on anything?
No.
When it, oh no, okay. No. Yes, I thought so. Great.
Apparently we do.
What are the most important issues to you then, or at least one that you would make a difference on who you voted for?
If they, shoots.
Gun legislation.
Yeah.
Okay, the gun
Yeah.
legislation, and it's not just the constitutional amendment, it's what they voted on when it comes to open carry or needing registration, special registration, or limit the use of automatic weapons that allow you to shoot, hundreds of bullets. Okay. How about school, access to education and community colleges? Think about what's important to your day-to-day life. Not because I have a disability, but what is it going to improve my quality of life? And a lot of times it's vocational training and jobs. Right? It's also when I have people that are on what they call entitlement programs, they're means tested benefits, meaning that if you have too much money or too much in the bank, medical assistance, SSI, to what degree they can keep and save money without having their health care benefits eliminated or penalized from them. Also, the availability and funding of occupational therapists, speech therapists, mental health. Mental health is a big issue around the country. So I want to find out what's their position on mental health and community mental health. So you just look. The other thing is county supervisors. When you're looking at elections, county supervisors control the money. People think about Iowa City, but when you look at who controls the human services budget, that's the county. And people sometimes, there are no city elections that I'm aware of, will vote for the city and ignore the county. We had a candidate in here before, so he talked a lot about things, but it's sort of saying, how did you vote on this, why, and or what would you vote on? So it's just questioning. Our dinner table becomes quite argumentative at times, because we have the whole spectrum of people. So go to town halls. We talked about the League of Women Voters. You talked about having another meeting as well. And so find those out. And the DD Council has a great sheet about self-advocacy. They have an entire book on that. But most of their lessons are pretty straightforward. If you're worried about speaking in public, you write your questions down first. And then you choose which ones you want to ask, because you may only get one. And you ever go to one of those meetings where they give, let me just ask one question, and it's a 45-part question. And so no one ever answers it. And to collect your thoughts, and then make sure it gets to the moderator if they take them, or that you ask it. How many people, are you afraid of public speaking? Not a chance. You did such a great job, and you're an actress, right? You're a trained actress, and you were just eloquent. But some of us don't like public speaking. You can't tell it right now, I'm scared to death. I'm going to say something wrong, it's videoed, so I have to be very careful about what I say. So Tom told me no partisan politics, nothing else. So I'm not wearing any badges, or just go out and vote. Okay, and then think about ways that you want to communicate with other people. That was our big issue today. We've got so much information and talented people, but if it's just among us, then it's not really going to help. So think about how to get this information and materials to people without boring them to death. So I see my time is up in the courts. You ever see Law and Order in the appellate courts? The red light goes on, right? And if you say a word extra, they cut your throat. You're not allowed to do it. And in Maryland, in the federal courts, one of the judges said, Mr. Sandler, if you go beyond the red, the trap door opens underneath you. So I'm going to spare you that drama, and let me know if you have any questions, and I thank everybody for their great work and for talking about the changes of law, so I didn't really have to go into detail. But I have the 29 pages if you really need a sleep enhancer. Thank you.
Thank you.